In the previous video, we looked at how to animate a bouncing ball, and in particular, we made a bouncing ball that continually bounces, it never loses energy, and just keeps on going and going and going. In this video, we're going to take a look at how to animate another bouncing ball, but this time the ball will lose energy. First, we'll do a little bit of review, however. I'm going to take my timeline and we'll make another bouncing ball that just continually goes. It'll just continually bouncing. I'm going to make this animation 1 second long, in other words 24 frames. And in fact, I'm going to make my starting point not on frame 1, but on frame 0. For my bouncing ball, I will create a sphere. And so that we can better see that sphere, I'm going to apply a shader to it. I'll make a blend, and we'll make the color of that blend red. One other thing I'd like to do that'll help make this bouncing ball animation a little more effective is to create a ground plane. And I will also create a light. I'm going to position my light by coming over here to my top viewport. I currently have my light selected. I'll say look through selected, and this will allow me to look through the light as if it were a camera. And I will also, in my perspective viewport, type 7 so that we can see the effect that the light is having on this surface. Now, another thing I would like to do is come over here to lighting and turn on shadows. That way we'll actually see the shadow cast by the light. The reason for creating this light is because I think that it communicates to our viewers more so that that the ball is hitting a surface. Notice that if I elevate the ball a little off the surface, it obviously is not on the surface because we see this cast shadow here. But when we actually place it on the surface here, we get a better indication that it's actually sitting there on this floor. So now that we have all this set up, we are ready to animate. And again, this will be mostly review from what I did in a previous video. I'll raise the sphere up, let's say 8 units on frame 0, and I'm going to key it by pressing S on my keyboard. This will place an animation key on all 10 of these channels here, all the translates, rotates, scales, and visibility, although we'll only currently need the animation on the translate Y, which is our up and down. I will scrub to the end of my animation to frame 24, and I will key it again. So now I have 2 animation keys. If I scrub it in the animation, however, nothing happens because I haven't changed any of the values. I'll go to frame 12, halfway in between here, and we'll bring the ball back down to the surface and key it as well. So now we have the beginning of our bouncing ball animation, and if I play it, we get this repeating bouncing ball. It's not very convincing, however. Currently we have it coming in slowly. It slows down before it hits the surface, and instead of slowing down before it hits the surface, it should actually be speeding up. So we'll fix that now. So if you'll remember from the previous video, we went to what is called the graph editor to work with the object's animation curves. So I'm going to go to Windows, Animation Editors, Graph Editor, and here we'll see all of our channels Same channels here as what we see here in our channel box. You'll see we have our visibility, our translate X, Y, and Z. Notice that the translate X has animation keys on it. However, because it's not changing in value, which is the vertical axis here, the value remains the same throughout the whole entire animation. This is true for the translate Z as well as all of our rotates and scales. The only channel that we currently have animated is the translate Y. And here we can see exactly what is going on with our animation. What you'll notice is if I scrub in the timeline here, and we come to frame 12 where the ball hits the surface, and we look at the animation curve here, you'll notice that there's a slow in and a slow out. And that is what we need to eliminate to make this a convincing ball bounce. So with this key selected, I'm going to come here to this button right here. This is the break tangents button. And I'll click on it, and it will break this tangent, allowing me to grab the handles and using my middle mouse button, adjust them. Remember not to bring your animation curves up like this and beyond the value of the key here. We need to scale that back a little and do something like this. I'll do the same for the other side as well. Again, being careful not to overshoot that key. We'll scale it back something like this. And this should look pretty good. You'll see that there's a nice slow out at the top. It'll come down as this curve gets steeper and steeper. The ball will get faster and faster until it hits the surface. And then it'll bounce out very quickly. And then as it comes back up to its apex here, it will slow down. So let's check it out. And sure enough, that's what's happening. Now, one thing I've noticed with the screen captures as I record, what I'm doing is that it does skip frames. So here is a render of my bouncing ball where you can see it without the skipped frames. Now, that's mostly review from the previous video, but what we want to do with this bouncing ball is make it lose energy over time. So I'm going to once again increase my timeline here. In fact, I'll bring it back to frame 120, so the whole animation will be 120 frames. If I play it, you'll notice that it's no longer repeating until it gets past 120, and then we'll repeat again. And what we'll do is we'll set more animation keys so that we get some consecutive bounces, but eventually it'll lose energy and come to a settle. It'll remain perfectly still after maybe 4 or 5 bounces. So let's see how we're going to do this. Currently, the ball starts on frame 0. It takes 12 frames for it to come down to hit the surface, but then the next bounce should actually take less time and shouldn't bounce as high. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this key on frame 12 and I'm going to just bring it back, let's say 2 frames. So instead, we'll also bring the height down lower and re-key that. I accidentally keyed it on the wrong key, so I just undid that. I'm going to go to frame 22 now, bring it down, key it. So you can see that this second bounce here is less high than where it started from at the beginning of the animation. So just as review, it's taking 12 frames for it to come down, but then this next bounce, this second bounce, is only 10 frames. and is going to be less high. Now, as it starts to fall down again, it'll also take 10 frames. The bounce up is 10 frames, and then the coming down will also be 10 frames. So if we're at frame 22, I'm going to scrub to 32, bring the ball down to the surface, and key it. I'm going to close the graph editor because we'll return to it later. Let's just see what we have here. So it's going to come down, it bounces, it goes less high, comes back down, and now we'll do another bounce. Now this takes 10 frames and then 10 frames, so we'll make this one less even. Perhaps we'll try 8 frames. So I'm going to go to frame 40, bring it up, key it, and come another 8 frames over to frame 48 and bring it back down and key it. So we have 12, 10, and 10, 8, and 8. Let's try 6 and 6 now. So we'll go to frame 54. I'll key it. Frame 60. Bring it back down. And maybe we'll try 2 more bounces. So this is 6. We could go with, we'll go with 4. Four and 4. And then perhaps one tiny little bounce that'll be 2 and 2. And we'll key that. So let's take a look at our animation now. It's going to need some work, but let's see what we have. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Right now you can see that the first bounce is the most convincing, but then after that you can see how we've got that slow in, slow out on these next bounces here, which are not very convincing. So what we'll do is we'll return to the graph editor and we'll fix that. Okay. So opening up the graph editor, let's take a look at the Translate Y channel. And in fact, you can see that we've got this nice slow out here. It bounces up. We've got the slow in here as well, but then here, on each one of these bounces here, that's where you can see that we've got that slow in, slow out that we don't want. So what I'm going to do is select all of those keys where I'm only selecting the ones where the ball is hitting the surface. Notice I'm not actually selecting these peaks here. I'm going to break the tangents again. And then once again, I'll come in here and select the handles for those tangents and middle mouse drag them to get these nice arcs happening at the tops. Okay, let's see how our animation is looking now. I'll rewind and then play. And that's looking a lot better. Now, it's very important that you always look at your animations in the intended viewport. Don't trust just what you see in the graph editor. look at and evaluate your animation and see if it looks like it's either speeding up or slowing down unnaturally in places, and then fix it accordingly in the graph editor or by setting more keyframes. Now I'm going to adjust this one a little bit more by selecting it and once again opening up my graph editor. I'll select the translate Y, and what I want you to see is how we can actually not just adjust our animation. Like let's say I want this one to bounce a little higher. I could simply go to that keyframe, raise it up a little, key it. You'll notice that now it's a little higher here as well. I can also adjust my animation in the graph editor itself. I can grab the key and then holding down Shift to lock it in the this vertical value. I don't want to accidentally move it in time like this. I want to just move it this way for its value. You can see how I can adjust the animation in the graph editor and fine-tune it in here as well. So let's take a look at the animation now. And I think I'm pretty happy with that. Now, before wrapping up this video, I'd like to just talk about a couple more things for you to think about. One thing, again, take notice of how the shadow really helps sell the idea of the ball bouncing off the surface and then actually making contact with the floor. I think the shadow helps very, very much in that regard here. The other thing to consider is that this is just one bouncing ball. What if we wanted to make this ball look like it were a heavy ball? Or what if we wanted to make it look like a light ball? How would we animate it differently then to get those ideas across of a light or a heavy ball? What if it's a bowling ball? How does a bowling ball bounce differently than a basketball? How does a basketball bounce differently than, let's say, a soccer ball or a volleyball or a beach ball? And we'll take a look at that problem in a future video. But in the next video, actually what we'll take a look at is taking this ball that is bouncing and losing energy and not having it just move on the up and down axis, but making it move in a direction, for instance, in the Z direction. We'll take a look at that in the next video. As I mentioned earlier, my screen capture does skip frames. So here is a render of the finished ball bouncing while losing energy. I hope this video has been useful for you, and thank you for watching.